lavender dusk settled over the seaside town of Rosendale as the Pink Palace, once a summer retreat for royalty, rose like a faded jewel against the horizon. Its grand ballroom, glittering with chandeliers, now echoed with muted whispers and uneasy glances. Moments earlier, heiress Lydia Montrose had been found lifeless atop the marble staircase, a single pink rose placed upon her chest, an unmistakable signature of deliberation. As panic swept the estate's elite guests, a calm, unmistakable figure stepped forward. Chapter 1. The Death at Dusk. The sea lay quiet under a lavender dusk, its surface tinged with rose-gold light as though nature itself wished to honor the Pink Palace standing proudly along the cliffs of Rosendale. Once a jewel of aristocratic gatherings, the palace now carried an air of faded grandeur, its salmon-pink facade softened by salt, sun, and time. Yet tonight it glittered once more like a resurrected relic, its windows radiating golden warmth into the descending twilight. Inside, a gala had been underway. Music had drifted through the halls. Couples had spun gracefully beneath crystal chandeliers, and laughter had rippled across polished marble. An evening of elegance, meant to mark the reopening of the historic estate after years of renovation. But elegance, Hercule Poirot reflected as he stepped through the grand entrance, often frayed when confronted with death. He had not been invited to the gala. His presence was the result of a hastily delivered telegram only an hour earlier. As he handed his coat and hat to a trembling footman, Poirot surveyed the entrance hall. The towering mirrors that multiplied the glow of candlelight, the sweeping staircase carved of rosy marble, and the clusters of distressed guests whispering in corners like frightened birds. Above them all loomed the staircase itself, the scene of tragedy. At its midpoint lay the lifeless form of Lydia Montrose, the young heiress whose lavish celebrations had filled society pages. Her dark hair spilled across the marble like a fallen cascade. A silk gown of palest pink shimmered faintly beneath the lights. Her eyes, once known for their sparkle, stared unseeing toward the high, muraled ceiling. And upon her chest rested a single pink rose, perfect, fragranceless, and deeply unsettling. Poirot moved closer, the shuffle of his polished shoes echoing in the vast stillness. A police cordon had already been placed, though the officers seemed grateful for Poirot's arrival, their faces pale with uncertainty. Rosendale was a quiet town. Such an elaborate death was far beyond their ordinary experience. Inspector Aldridge, a man with a bristling mustache and earnest eyes, stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, thank heavens. I was beginning to fear we should misstep before London even agreed to send help." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "The situation, it seems, is grave enough to warrant haste." "Haste, yes," Aldridge said grimly, lowering his voice. "At first glance, one might assume a fall. But," his gaze flicked to the rose, "this does not look like an accident." Poirot approached the stairs, his steps precise. He crouched beside Lydia Montrose's body with the delicacy of a man who revered order even in tragedy. "May I?" he asked softly, though no one opposed him. He studied the rose first. A fresh bloom, but not from a garden nearby. It lacked scent, suggesting a rare, specially cultivated variety, possibly preserved or treated. The stem had been clipped at an angle, smooth, precise. "A symbol," Poirot murmured. "Placed with intention." Inspector Aldridge nodded. "We found no petals nearby. Whoever placed it brought it intentionally." Poirot's fingertips brushed lightly across Lydia's wrist, cold, but not long gone from warmth. "Time of death?" "Approximately 1 hour ago," Aldridge said. "Just before dusk. She was found by one of the guests." Poirot rose, surveying the marble. "There is little sign of a struggle. But her position, it is too neat, too picturesque. The angle of the limbs, the placement on the step." He shook his head slowly. No. Someone arranged her. A hush fell over those gathered nearby. Poirot's gaze traveled upward to the landing. The railing. Did she fall from there? So it seems, Aldridge replied. There is a scuff on the railing, perhaps from a heel or a hand. Poirot ascended, inspecting the polished surface. A faint smudge, a partial footprint in dust near the balustrade. Feminine, slender, perhaps Lydia's, perhaps not. And near it something glimmered faintly. He knelt and gently picked up a small object. A silver cufflink engraved with the letter M. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A clue left behind so conspicuously? Either the murderer is careless, or they wish us to look in a particular direction. He pocketed the cufflink in an evidence pouch and descended the stairs once more. Around them, the palace's vast halls seemed to hold their breath, listening. Poirot turned toward the nearest cluster of onlookers. Their elegant attire now appeared ghost-like under the soft lights, their expressions etched with shock or, Poirot noted, something more complex. Fear, suspicion, calculation. Inspector, Poirot said quietly, I will need to speak with the guests. All of them. Yes, of course. Poirot's gaze settled first on a tall gentleman with a stiff posture and eyes cold as winter steel. This, according to Aldridge, was Michael Montrose, Lydia's cousin and nearest living relative. His jaw was clenched with something not quite resembling grief. Beside him stood Adrien Devereux, the renowned pianist whose scandalous temperament often made headlines. His fingers twitched occasionally as though still playing invisible keys. Nearby, a woman with sleek blonde hair, Clara Whitmore, Lydia's personal secretary, stood trembling, her gaze darting toward the staircase again and again. Finally, a young man with dark, stormy eyes, Henry Caldwell, Lydia's fiancé, remained apart from the others, leaning against a pillar as though the weight of the moment had crushed him. Poirot studied each of them in turn. Their emotions were believable, yet emotions, he knew, were clever disguises. Do not fear, Poirot said gently, stepping toward the group. I shall ask only a few initial questions. Michael Montrose spoke first, impatience tightening his voice. Must we do this now? Lydia is... she is... His composure faltered momentarily. We are all in shock. Poirot gave a small bow of sympathy. Understandable, monsieur. Yet the sooner we begin, the sooner the truth reveals itself. Henry Caldwell stepped forward, his face pale. She, Lydia. She would never have leaned over that railing. She was careful. Always. Ah, Poirot said, tilting his head. You believe she was pushed? I don't know what to believe, Henry whispered. Only that this is wrong. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. Tell me, monsieur, where were you at the time of her death? Henry blinked. I was in the winter garden. Alone. He swallowed. We had argued earlier, and she wished for space. An argument, Poirot repeated gently. Of what nature? A private one, Henry said tensely, looking away. Poirot let the question rest for now. Instead, he turned to Adrien Devereux, whose elegant suit and artistic demeanor seemed oddly subdued. And you, monsieur? I was at the piano in the ballroom, Adrien said, his voice a velvety baritone. Many guests can confirm it. Poirot nodded. Très bien. Next, Clara Whitmore lowered her gaze as he approached. And mademoiselle? I was in Lydia's study, she stammered, finalizing the guest list for next week's charity luncheon. I didn't know anything was wrong until I heard the scream. Poirot watched her carefully. Her hands trembled, but not her voice. Interesting. Finally, Michael Montrose straightened stiffly as Poirot addressed him. And you, Monsieur Montrose? I was in the West Hall, he said curtly, reviewing the renovation plans. I had no reason to be near the staircase. Poirot observed the man's tailored suit, the immaculate cufflink on his remaining sleeve, and the absence of one on the other. "Your cufflink," Poirot said mildly. "You have lost one?" Michael's brows drew together. "What? No, I—" He glanced down, his expression twisted. "How? When did—" Poirot allowed him to flounder momentarily before holding up the silver cufflink in its evidence pouch. "This is yours, I presume." Michael paled. I don't know how it ended up there." "Perhaps it fell," Clara murmured quietly. "Perhaps," Poirot echoed, though his tone suggested doubt. The room felt suddenly colder. Poirot's sharp gray eyes swept the scene. Again, the angles, the lighting, the unnatural stillness of Lydia's body. The rose, the cufflink, the nervous glances. The lies disguised as truth and truths disguised as lies. He turned slowly back toward the staircase and allowed his mind to walk through the events, retracing steps that only he could see. "The position of the body," Poirot murmured. "The symmetry, the staging, someone wished to create a tableau, either to deliver a message or to mock the investigators." His gaze moved to the rose again. "One rose," Poirot said softly. "A symbol of beauty, but also of secrecy." Inspector Aldridge nodded. "The rose seems like the key." Poirot smiled faintly, though his expression held no warmth. "Ah, mon ami, in murder there is never just one key. There are many. But some are disguised as decoration, and others wish to draw us astray." He looked once more at the four suspects, each now staring at him with a different expression. Defiance, fear, confusion, resentment. Poirot straightened his cuffs, a familiar gesture signaling the activation of his little gray cells. "I shall examine the scene more thoroughly," he said. "But already something disturbs me, something very small, something very important." "And what's that?" Aldridge asked. Poirot turned to the staircase, his eyes narrowing. "If Mademoiselle Montrose fell," he said slowly, "she would not have landed where she lies. No, not so neatly. Not without marks of struggle or impact on her hands. Her injuries do not align with the distance or angle, and most troubling." He pointed toward a faint smear of pink powder on the step beside her. "That is not marble dust," Poirot said. "It is cosmetic powder, fresh, deliberately placed." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Poirot continued, "Someone wished to ensure her body remained precisely where it is now." The guests stiffened. Clara's breath caught. Henry's jaw tightened. Adrian's hands froze mid-gesture, and Michael's face drained of color. Poirot gestured to the rose again. "And as for this, only one suspect here has ties to a botanical supplier specializing in rare, unscented cultivars." Eyes turned slowly toward Adrian. The pianist lifted his chin. "I collect flowers for inspiration. That proves nothing." "Indeed, monsieur," Poirot said. "For now it proves nothing. But soon the truth will come. It always does." Poirot studied the group once more, his gaze scanning faces, posture, reactions. One of these people had lied. Perhaps all of them had lied. "Monsieur Poirot," Inspector Aldridge whispered, "do you suspect murder?" Poirot's voice was calm, resolute, almost serene. "I do not suspect murder, mon ami." He paused. "I am certain of it." A gasp rippled around the hall. Poirot clasped his hands neatly before him. "This was no accident," he said. "This was a performance, a carefully prepared act. The murderer believes themselves clever. But they do not yet understand." His gaze sharpened like a blade. "That Hercule Poirot is here." Across the hall, a distant clock tolled, its chimes echoing through the silent palace. Poirot turned to the guests, the staircase, the rose, and finally the darkening windows overlooking the sea. He felt it now, the beginning of a puzzle, a whisper of something deeper than jealousy or rage, a motive carefully shielded, a secret woven into the elegant tapestry of the Pink Palace. As the last echo faded, Poirot spoke softly, more to himself than to the others. The Pink Palace holds many secrets, I think, and tonight they will begin to reveal themselves. The chapter closed on the heavy silence that followed, a silence filled with fear, with accusation, and with the unmistakable scent of mystery. Chapter 2. The guests behind the masks. The ballroom of the Pink Palace, once radiant with celebration, now felt like a grand stage dimmed after the final act. Music lay strangled in the strings of the unattended violin, and the chandeliers cast uneasy shadows over every polished surface. Guests had been gathered and held within the ballroom while the investigation proceeded, their whispered conversations blending into a low hum of anxiety. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his posture impeccable, his expression composed. The little gray cells he knew required order, and the ballroom, even amidst chaos, offered a measure of symmetry. He surveyed the guests with a steady, unblinking gaze, noting how grief manifested differently in each. Some wept openly, others whispered. A few stared blankly, stunned into silence. And then there were those who watched Poirot. Those were the ones he was most interested in. Inspector Aldridge approached, notepad in hand. "Shall we begin the questioning, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot gave a small nod. "Oui, mon ami. But we shall begin gently. In tragedy, people reveal much without realizing." Aldridge gestured toward the 4 primary suspects standing apart at the far end of the room. Poirot turned his attention first to Michael Montrose, Lydia's cousin, a tall, severe man with dark hair slicked back and a jaw clenched as if in perpetual anger. His tailored suit was immaculate save for the missing silver cufflink. He stood rigid, his eyes locked on the chandeliers rather than the corpse that had been removed moments earlier. Poirot approached him at a leisurely pace. "Monsieur Montrose," Poirot said softly, "you appear troubled." Michael scoffed. "Who here is not troubled? My cousin is dead." "Indeed, it is a moment of great sorrow, but your posture, your expression, it suggests more than grief." Poirot tilted his head. "It suggests fear." Michael's eyes snapped toward him, sharp and cold. "Fear? Of what?" "Of exposure," Poirot replied gently. "Perhaps of a truth you have kept hidden." Michael's jaw tightened further. "I hardly think this is the time for psychological probing." "And yet," Poirot said with mild amusement, "it is precisely the time." He let the silence simmer before continuing. "You were reviewing renovation plans in the West Hall, oui?" Michael nodded stiffly. "And did anyone see you there?" "No," Michael replied. "I was alone." Poirot observed him for a beat longer, then bowed slightly. "Merci." He turned next to Adrien Devereux, the pianist, who stood beside the marble fireplace, running his fingers nervously across the keys of an imaginary piano. His dark hair fell messily across his forehead, and his elegant long coat gave him the air of a romantic tragedian. "Monsieur Devereux," Poirot said warmly, "you were performing at the time of death?" Adrien exhaled sharply. "Yes, the nocturne. Many guests heard me. I could not have been on the staircase." Poirot smiled. "You play beautifully, I am told." Adrien's expressive eyes lifted slightly. "Thank you. Lydia appreciated my music." "Vous étiez proche?" Adrien's gaze darkened. "Friends, nothing more." "Ah," Poirot's eyebrow rose subtly. "And yet your name has been linked to hers in the society columns, non?" Adrien's fingers froze in midair. "Idle gossip. Lydia and I shared an artistic rapport. That is all." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And the rose?" You cultivate rare flowers. Adrian stiffened. Plenty of people buy flowers. That means nothing. Perhaps. Poirot did not press further, for now. He moved on to Clara Whitmore, Lydia's personal secretary. Clara looked younger up close, maybe 24, with a delicate face and anxious blue eyes. Her hands clutched a leather-bound notepad as though it were a shield. Mademoiselle Whitmore, Poirot greeted gently. A difficult evening, oui? Her voice quivered. Terrible. I still cannot believe she's gone. You were quite loyal to Mademoiselle Montrose. I owed her everything, Clara whispered. She hired me when no one else would. Poirot regarded her carefully. You say you were in Lydia's study before she died. Did she appear distressed earlier? Clara hesitated. She was worried about something. A letter arrived this afternoon. After reading it, she became pale and canceled her evening meeting. But she did not tell me what the letter said. Poirot's eyes brightened slightly. Where is this letter now? I don't know. It wasn't in her study when I looked. Poirot made a mental note. A missing letter. Très intéressant. He finally turned to Henry Caldwell, Lydia's fiancé. Henry stood against a lone pillar, shoulders sagging. His hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, his expression hollow. Monsieur Caldwell, Poirot said, approaching him last. My condolences. Henry looked up, his eyes red. Thank you. His voice was hoarse. You loved Mademoiselle Montrose. More than anything, Henry whispered. We were to be married in the spring. Poirot nodded sympathetically. And yet you quarreled earlier. Henry shut his eyes in pain. I didn't want to argue. Lydia was overwhelmed with preparations, family tensions, financial pressures, the renovation. I only asked her to postpone the wedding by a few months. She took it badly. Poirot's interest sharpened. Why postpone? Henry hesitated. I needed time to settle a personal matter, something from my past. I feared it might affect her. A secret? Poirot asked quietly. Yes. Henry exhaled shakily. I meant to tell her tonight. Poirot studied him in silence. Guilt radiated from the man, but guilt was not proof of murder. Indeed, guilt often belonged to the innocent. He stepped back and surveyed all four suspects. Each had motive, each had opportunity, each had secrets. And someone was lying. Poirot motioned to Inspector Aldridge. We must organize systematic interviews, but first, there are things that cannot wait. Aldridge leaned closer. What things? Poirot folded his arms behind his back. There is a missing letter, a rare rose with no scent, a body arranged with artistry, almost reverence, and a cufflink that appears where it should not be. Aldridge rubbed his forehead. It sounds like a riddle. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, mon ami, it is a performance. A hush fell over the room as Poirot lifted his voice to address the gathered guests. Mesdames et messieurs, he announced, rest assured, Hercule Poirot shall uncover the truth. But I must warn you, the murderer is among us. Perhaps watching, perhaps listening. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the balcony overlooking the ballroom. Heavy curtains swayed, though no one had passed through. For a moment, Poirot sensed eyes upon him, cold, calculating, hidden. He stepped forward, his voice lowering. Someone here wears a mask, Poirot said, a mask of innocence, but masks. They always slip. His words fell like a shiver over the crowd. Poirot pressed his fingertips together, the gesture as precise as the thoughts forming in his mind. And when they do, he concluded softly, the truth will shine through. The ballroom erupted into whispered speculation. Behind them, the curtains on the balcony stilled. Chapter 3. The Rose with No Scent, The winter garden of the Pink Palace was a strange hybrid of beauty and melancholy. Moonlight spilled through the curved glass roof, bathing the exotic plants in a ghostly silver glow. Pale orchids hung from delicate trellises and ferns whispered as a cool breeze slipped through a half-opened window. Once a treasured retreat of the Montrose family, it now felt more like a sanctuary haunted by a single question. Why had Lydia Montrose died? Hercule Poirot moved through the winter garden with deliberate grace. His small, polished shoes clicked faintly on the mosaic floor while Inspector Aldridge followed behind, scribbling notes. "Odd place, this," Aldridge muttered. "All this beauty, yet it feels eerie." Poirot glanced at him. "Eerie, yes, but useful. A greenhouse is a place for cultivation of flowers, of secrets, and sometimes of lies." Aldridge frowned. "You think something happened here?" Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he stopped before a glass display stand containing a collection of roses suspended in small vases. Each bloom rested in still water, labeled meticulously with botanical names. One stood out immediately. A pale, blush-pink rose with impossibly smooth petals, soft, flawless, and utterly without scent. Poirot leaned forward. "Voilà," he whispered. "The twin to the rose placed upon the chest of Mademoiselle Montrose." Aldridge stepped closer. "You're certain?" "Absolutely." Poirot pointed at the handwritten label. "Rosa mirabilis, hybrid number 7. Created for aesthetic perfection. No scent. Très rare. Not sold in ordinary shops." Aldridge whistled under his breath. "So Adrien Devereux wasn't lying about collecting rare flowers." Poirot stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Perhaps not lying, but withholding." He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the room. "That is another matter." On a nearby counter lay an elegant silver watering can, a pair of pruning shears, and a small journal. Poirot picked up the journal carefully. Inside were neat, artistic sketches of roses. Some pages bore annotations, water ratios, growth cycles, petal density. Near the back, a pressed rose was taped onto the paper. A pink rose identical to the one on Lydia's body. Poirot's brows lifted. "Someone has been cultivating this very bloom," he murmured. Aldridge leaned forward. "Whose journal is that?" Poirot flipped to the front page. The name was written in fine, looping script. A.D. Aldridge breathed sharply. "Adrien Devereux." Poirot closed the book. "The pianist is indeed connected to the flower. But remember, mon ami, motive, opportunity, and emotion must align. A flower alone does not kill." He moved deeper into the winter garden past hanging vines and fronds that brushed his shoulder. The air grew colder as they approached the far corner where a wrought iron bench sat beside a cluster of pale moon lilies. Poirot paused. "Here," he said softly. Aldridge squinted. "What is it?" Poirot pointed his cane. He had borrowed it for mobility on the wet tiles, to a faint set of footprints in the soft earth beside the lilies. Faint, but feminine. High-heeled. One print was smeared as though someone had stumbled. Aldridge inhaled sharply. "Do you think these belong to Lydia?" Poirot crouched, studying the shape. "Possibly, but there is something else." He touched the soil delicately. Still slightly moist, these prints were made very recently, perhaps shortly, before her death. He rose and followed the trail until it disappeared near the marble threshold leading back into the palace. "Lydia came here," Poirot said. "Or someone wearing similar shoes wished us to believe she did." "Why would she come here before dying?" Poirot did not reply immediately. His mind whirred as he returned to the bench. Something caught his eye, a glint between the slats. Stooping, he extracted a small object. A pearl button, faintly scratched. Aldridge raised an eyebrow. That doesn't match Lydia's dress. No, Poirot agreed, but it does match the jacket worn by Clara Whitmore. Aldrich stiffened. Are you accusing her? Poirot shook his head. I accuse no one. I simply observe. He tucked the pearl button into an evidence pouch and stood in contemplative silence. Behind them, the winter garden door creaked open. Clara Whitmore entered, her face tight with worry. Oh, Monsieur Poirot. Inspector Aldrich, I didn't realize anyone was here. Poirot smiled gently. Mademoiselle, I had hoped to speak with you again. Please join us. Clara hesitated, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her notepad. Poirot gestured to the rose display. You are familiar with Adrien Devereux's flowers, no? Clara swallowed. He keeps some of them here. Lydia allowed him to use part of the winter garden. Did Lydia come here often? Sometimes, Clara whispered. She found it calming. And yesterday evening? Poirot asked quietly. Clara froze. Her lips parted, but no words came. I don't know. Poirot stepped closer. You are trembling, mademoiselle. Is it from grief, or from fear of what the truth may reveal? Clara's eyes shone with sudden emotion. I don't want to be involved in this. Lydia was my friend. Poirot regarded her gently. Then help us understand why her final hours are filled with shadows. Clara closed her eyes, exhaled shakily, and whispered, She came here at dusk. I followed her just to check on her, but she sent me away. She said she had to meet someone. Poirot's expression sharpened. Meet someone? Here? Who? I don't know, Clara said. Her voice, it shook. She seemed frightened. Poirot exchanged a glance with Aldrich. Did anyone else know she was coming here? He asked. Clara bit her lip. Yes, someone was already waiting in the winter garden. Poirot's breath caught. Who? Clara whispered. Michael Montrose, Aldrich blurted. The cousin. He claimed he was in the West Hall. Poirot nodded slowly. Ah, yes, and yet his cufflink was found on the landing, and now we discover he was here waiting. Clara hugged her notepad tightly. I don't know what they discussed, but Lydia's voice rose once. She said, You promised I won't let you bury this. And Michael replied, You don't understand what's at stake. Aldrich cursed under his breath. He lied then. Poirot pressed his fingertips together. 2 roses, one on Lydia's chest, one in Adrien's journal, a footprint trail, a missing letter, a pearl button from Clara, a meeting with Michael. The puzzle pieces were forming a frame, but the picture inside remained veiled. Poirot turned his gaze back to Clara. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been helpful. Clara nodded shakily and hurried away. Aldrich rubbed his temples. Montrose looks guiltier by the minute. Poirot did not respond. Instead, he bent toward the rose again, tracing the perfect petal edge lightly with his finger. There is something more here, mon ami, Poirot murmured. The rose is beautiful, too beautiful. A symbol, yes, but what does it symbolize? Love, promise, betrayal? Aldrich sighed. And who placed it on her body? Poirot straightened slowly, his eyes narrowing. The murderer, he said simply. And the murderer is someone who understands the language of roses. He turned, his gaze drifting to the glass door leading back to the palace. And someone who wished to speak through them. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his silhouette framed by moonlit glass. Tonight, he whispered, the Pink Palace reveals its first true secret. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Winter Garden. The Pink Palace slumbered under a veil of midnight stillness, its rose-tinted walls glowing faintly under the moonlight. Most of the guests, fatigued by the evening's interrogations and unsettled by the weight of tragedy, had finally retreated to their suites. Yet the palace itself seemed restless, as though the very stones retained memory of Lydia Montrose's fall. Hercule Poirot, however, had no intention of sleeping. His mind thrummed with the rhythm of unanswered questions. There was something too deliberate about the rose placed upon the victim's chest, something theatrical, yet not quite artistic. And theatrics always concealed insecurity, or fear. He stood in the dim corridor, straightening his tie and smoothing his immaculate mustache before stepping out into the brisk night air. The winter garden, an enclosed glass atrium filled with exotic plants, lay at the far end of the courtyard, its structure glowing faintly beneath lanterns set along the gravel path. Poirot moved slowly, eyes keen, steps soft. A detective investigating a death must listen not only to what is spoken, but to what trembles in the silence. Tonight, silence trembled everywhere. As Poirot approached the winter garden, he noticed an unusual detail. Though the palace staff claimed the atrium was shut at night, a thin line of warm light spilled from beneath the glass doors. "Ah," he murmured, "a place marked closed, yet someone is within. Always, this is interesting." He stepped closer, mindful of shadows. The faint scent of warmed orchids drifted outward, mingling with the crisp sea breeze. Then he heard it. Voices, not loud, but sharp, like whispers exchanged with urgency. Poirot slowed his breath and took cover behind a column, tilting his head slightly to separate the voices. One was male, low, tense. The other was female, quick, brittle with anxiety. "You promised me it was handled," the man hissed. "I did handle it, but you didn't tell me she confronted you," the woman whispered back fiercely. "She shouldn't have known anything at all." "Well, she did. And now look what's happened." Poirot's eyes narrowed. He recognized neither voice with certainty. Yet there was something familiar in the woman's tone, sharp, controlled on the surface but trembling beneath. Secretary Evelyn Hart? Or perhaps Lydia's cousin Clara. Both possessed voices that could harden under pressure. The man, however, that was more difficult. Marcus Vale, the fiancé, had a smoother, more aristocratic cadence. And Edwin Blake, the pianist, spoke with a theatrical lilt even when angry. But Gerard Montrose, Lydia's cousin, had a clipped, hurried way of speaking. Poirot leaned closer. "Listen," the man said, breath harsh. "If anyone discovers our connection—" "No one will," she snapped, "unless you lose your nerve." Poirot's brows lifted. "Our connection, very interesting indeed." The voices moved deeper into the winter garden. Poirot, careful to remain undetected, eased open the door by a fraction, letting the voices guide him. Beyond the glass walls, the moon washed the garden in a ghostly silver. Ferns cast rippling shadows across the tiled floor, and orchids glowed like suspended lanterns. The contrast between beauty and secrecy was stark, like a stage set for illicit drama. "We can't meet like this anymore," the woman said, "not with Lydia dead." "And what do you propose?" the man countered. "Running? Confessing? Don't be absurd." "Not confessing, but we must be cautious." Poirot stiffened. Footsteps approached the door. Quickly he slipped behind a towering palm, positioning himself so that the leaves concealed his presence. The figures passed mere inches from him, silhouettes only, impossible to identify through the play of shadow and light. But one detail stood out. The woman wore heels, delicate ones clicking softly against the glassy floor. The man had a limp. Poirot's mind flicked through memory like pages in an indexed file. Among the suspects, only Gerard Montrose bore a slight limp, the result of a hunting accident he mentioned earlier that evening. The woman, then— "Patience," the man muttered. "We'll deny everything. There's no proof." "There might be," she replied. "Her ledger, she kept records." Poirot's pulse sharpened. Ledger, records, proof. Something Lydia kept that frightened them. What if the detective finds it? The woman whispered. Poirot froze. I doubt he will, the man said with bitter confidence. He is clever, yes, but he arrived too late. The woman breathed shakily. Still, we must hide what remains tomorrow at first light. Then abruptly, we should go. Someone may have heard us. Poirot pressed his back against the plant, remaining perfectly still as the footsteps faded and the winter garden fell silent. He waited a full minute before stepping out. Poirot examined the atrium. Nothing looked disturbed at first glance, but Poirot rarely looked only at first glance. Along a set of marble benches he noticed fresh impressions, two distinct shapes. A man and woman had clearly been seated here moments earlier. One of the cushions held a faint indentation as though something heavy, rectangular, perhaps a ledger, had rested upon it earlier. Mais oui, Poirot murmured. They speak of a ledger, and the cushion shows that something of weight sat here. Removed quickly, perhaps. He knelt and inspected the tiles. A single fallen petal lay at the edge of the bench, not from the orchids. This petal was from a rose, pale pink. Poirot picked it up gently. A rose appears again, he said softly. But this one, fresh, not like the staged flower upon poor Lydia. He sniffed the petal, no perfume. The same odd absence, he whispered. 2 roses, neither scented. But roses without scent did exist, rare varieties cultivated specifically for color, not fragrance. Could Lydia's killer have chosen that type intentionally? A personal signature? Or perhaps a clue? His little gray cells began to hum. Poirot stepped back into the courtyard, closing the winter garden doors quietly behind him. His mind replayed the whispered conversation. A secret connection between 2 suspects, a ledger Lydia kept, a man with a limp, a woman with fear but also resolve. He paused beneath a lantern, the rose petal between his fingers, shimmering faintly like a tiny shard of light. That's when he felt it. He was being watched. Poirot turned, eyes sharp. A shadow moved at the far end of the courtyard, swiftly, retreating into darkness. Too slender to be Gerard, too tall to be Evelyn. Perhaps Edwin, or Marcus, or even one of the servants? Poirot couldn't tell, but someone had seen him near the winter garden. Someone who now knew he overheard something he should not. The stakes had shifted. Back in his chamber, Poirot placed the rose petal upon his desk and studied it beneath the lamplight. He sat back, fingers steepled. This case, he whispered, is a knot tightening around many throats. But one must only pull the correct thread, and behold, the entire tapestry unravels. Poirot extinguished the lamp. Tomorrow he would confront the winter garden again. Tomorrow secrets would begin to stir. But for now the pink palace slept uneasily. Its winter roses waiting in the dark, petals trembling with truths yet unspoken. Chapter 5. A past buried in velvet. The dawn sun spilled over the pink palace like a wash of pale gold, softening the shadows but not the tension that had settled inside its halls. Hercule Poirot descended the grand staircase with deliberate calm, though his mind remained sharp and restless. Somewhere within these rose-tinted walls, secrets had begun to twitch like creatures disturbed in their burrows, and today he intended to coax them into the light. The breakfast room bustled faintly with the clinking of china and murmured conversations, yet the air felt strained. Everyone keeping one eye on their plate and another on everyone else. Gossip traveled quickly here. Fear traveled faster. Poirot entered quietly. His presence alone carved a hush through the room. Clara Montrose stiffened in her chair, spoon suspended above her untouched porridge. Marcus Vale looked up with a polite yet visibly troubled smile. Edwin Blake, the pianist, hunched over a cup of strong coffee, his fingers tapping restlessly as though playing notes only he could hear. Evelyn Hart sat perfectly poised, the crispness of her blouse immaculate despite a sleepless night. "Good morning, mes amis," Poirot said with soft courtesy. "I trust you slept well?" His question lingered, unanswered, heavy with implication. Evelyn cleared her throat. "As well as circumstances allow, Monsieur Poirot." A small, non-committal murmur passed through the table. Poirot swept his gaze across the group. "It is curious," he said lightly, "how tragedy often awakens memories we thought were long forgotten. In the case of Mademoiselle Lydia, I believe such memories may be of importance." Marcus stiffened. Clara dropped her spoon with a soft clatter. "Memories?" Clara asked, voice tight. "What sort of memories?" Poirot's eyes glimmered. "The kind that bind the past and the present. Sometimes the kind that kill." A gasp fluttered through the room. Edith, the housemaid replenishing coffee, nearly dropped her tray. Poirot bowed apologetically. "Forgive me. I speak only in generalities. Now I must excuse myself." He turned to leave, but not before observing every reaction. Marcus Vale's hand trembled. Clara's eyes glistened with sudden fear. Edwin Blake's tapping fingers halted abruptly. Evelyn Hart maintained her composure, but her gaze flickered toward the hallway that led to Lydia's private study. "Ah, very telling." Poirot slipped out of the room, unnoticed by most. But not by all. A pair of eyes followed him with quiet dread. The late Lydia Montrose's study lay within the eastern wing of the palace, its door locked the previous evening by staff. Poirot produced a small key that Lady Montrose herself had entrusted to him before retiring. "Only Lydia and I kept copies," she had whispered. "Whatever you find there, I fear it will not bring peace." Poirot pushed open the door. Dust motes swirled like drifting spirits in the slanted morning light. Velvet curtains framed the windows, heavy and luxurious. Lydia's desk, carved mahogany and polished to a mirror's sheen, stood at the center of the room like a silent sentinel. Poirot closed the door behind him and moved toward the desk. The top drawer was organized meticulously, letters tied with ribbon, stationery, ink. The second drawer contained accounts, property, shares, financial reports, all typical for someone of Lydia's position. The third drawer, however, was locked. Poirot lowered himself, examining the keyhole with a jeweler's precision. Scratches. Fresh ones. Someone had attempted to open it recently, with force and haste. He withdrew a slim tool from his pocket, and within seconds the lock yielded. Inside lay a velvet pouch, dark red, worn at the edges. Poirot lifted it gently and loosened the drawstring. A small leather-bound ledger slid out, the ledger from the Winter Garden Whispers. Poirot opened it. The first pages contained numbers, transactions, charitable donations, predictable entries. But as he turned further, the writing shifted tone. The ink grew darker, the handwriting sharper, almost frantic. Lydia had written names, dates, amounts, and beside one name, Gerard Montrose, a final entry stood out. "Threatened me. Says he knows about father's arrangement, claims I stole what was his. Must seek advice. Might confront him tomorrow." Poirot's expression tightened. He turned another page. Marcus Vale appeared next. "Engagement under pressure. He needs money. Far more than he admits. If I end things, he will not take it quietly." Poirot exhaled slowly. Lydia's world had been far more precarious than anyone realized. Then a third entry. Evelyn Hart. "Evelyn has been copying documents. I confronted her. She denied everything. Something is wrong. Must be cautious." Poirot's eyebrows rose. More secret still. He turned the page. A final entry, half finished. "Found out about Edwin's past. Why hide such a thing? Must decide to..." The rest of the sentence trailed off as though Lydia had been interrupted. The ink was dead in mid-stroke. Poirot closed the ledger and considered its placement in the drawer. "Whoever searched for it," he murmured, "either did not find it or was interrupted before returning." He replaced the velvet pouch and stood. A faint creak sounded behind him. Poirot turned. No one was visible, yet the lingering movement of the curtain near the study door suggested the presence of someone who had just slipped away. The eyes from breakfast. So they were watching him. Again. Poirot did not chase the shadow. Instead, he walked to the large portrait on the wall, Lydia as a child standing beside her father. A man with stern, cold eyes and a proud stance. Poirot studied the likeness. The same man who had once altered his will, causing a family rift so deep that even now, years later, it bled into murder. "A past buried in velvet," Poirot whispered, glancing at the drawer, "and a family fortune buried in resentment." He looked again at Lydia's painted smile, an eerie contrast to her fate. "Your secrets, mademoiselle, were known by too many." As he stepped out of the study, he found Lady Montrose trembling near the doorway. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked softly. Poirot inclined his head. She closed her eyes. "Lydia told me she feared something terrible was coming. She wouldn't say who she suspected, only that the past had returned." Poirot offered her his arm. "The past always returns, madame. It walks behind us and sometimes beside us, but occasionally," he lowered his voice, "it strikes from the front." Lady Montrose shuddered. Poirot escorted her down the hallway, mind already weaving the threads of motive into an increasingly intricate tapestry. Secrets, money, betrayal, threats whispered in winter gardens, a ledger detailing fears she meant to confront, and someone who slipped away every time Poirot drew near the truth. As they reached the corridor, Poirot paused. "Madam," he asked quietly, "did your daughter ever speak of roses, particularly those lacking scent?" Lady Montrose's face paled. Yes, she did. Her father once gave her a rose variety from his travels, a rare species, pale pink, beautiful, but without fragrance. She kept them pressed in her old journals. Poirot's little gray cells tingled. A rose with no scent, a symbol tied to Lydia's past, and perhaps to her death. The Pink Palace no longer felt like a sanctuary draped in velvet. It felt like a mausoleum of lies, and Poirot intended to unearth every one of them. Chapter 6. The Pianist's Lament. The music room of the Pink Palace felt strangely hollow in the aftermath of Lydia's death. The grand piano, once the centerpiece of elegant soirees, now sat untouched beneath a veil of dust motes swirling in the morning light. Hercule Poirot entered quietly, his polished shoes tapping lightly against the marble floor. Dante Renaud stood at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys but unwilling to touch them. His normally composed face was drawn, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. "You used to play beautifully here, monsieur," Poirot said gently. Dante didn't look up. "I haven't played since the night she died." Poirot approached with measured steps. "Grief has a way of silencing even the strongest passions." Dante exhaled shakily. "It's not only grief, it's guilt." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, guilt is a heavy companion, no?" Dante finally turned to him. "You found the music box, didn't you? The one in my room?" Poirot nodded. The small lacquered box, cracked along one corner, had been discovered among Dante's belongings. It played a delicate melody, one Lydia had adored. "She gave it to me years ago," Dante said, voice thick. "Back when I was a rising star, before everything fell apart." Poirot waited, patient and silent. "Lydia believed in me when no one else did. the pianist continued. She lent me money for my European tour, defended me when critics tried to destroy me. And how did I repay her? By ruining myself with gambling and pride. You and Lydia argued often, Poirot said softly. The staff heard raised voices. Dante winced. She wanted her loan repaid. I had nothing. She threatened to expose my debts. I thought perhaps she finally regretted helping me. Poirot studied him carefully. And the music box? Dante looked away. I broke it the night before she died, out of anger. Stupid, childish anger. When she announced she would cut ties with me, I lost control. I smashed it against the piano leg. He swallowed hard. But I didn't touch her, I swear it. Poirot walked to the piano, running a finger gently over its polished surface. Tell me, monsieur, the night of the murder, where were you truly? Dante hesitated. In the winter garden. His voice dropped. I heard Lydia arguing with someone, a man. The tone was sharp, desperate. I couldn't see who it was, the shadows were too thick, but I heard her say, "You have taken enough from me." Poirot's gaze sharpened. A man, you say? Dante nodded. Yes. Someone she feared. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. You have given me something very valuable, monsieur. Not proof of innocence, but a direction. Dante's shoulders sagged. Then I am not your suspect? Poirot offered a small smile. Everyone is a suspect until they are not. But you, I think, are a man who carries tragedy, not murder, on his shoulders. Dante's eyes glistened. Thank you. Poirot turned toward the door. Perhaps one day, Monsieur Renaud, you will play again, for Lydia's memory, and for your own redemption. And with that, he left the pianist alone with his silence and his ghosts. Chapter 7. Shadows on the Staircase. The grand staircase of the Pink Palace loomed like a frozen waterfall of marble and gold. It was here that Lydia Montrose had been found, her body arranged almost theatrically, a pink rose resting upon her still chest. Poirot stood at the base of the steps now, gazing upward with a thoughtful severity. Colonel Brewster joined him reluctantly. You've examined the staircase 3 times already, Poirot. What else could there be? Poirot raised a gloved finger. The question, mon colonel, is not what is here, but what is not. He climbed the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. Halfway up he paused, crouching beside the banister. Observe, he murmured. No blood spatter, no scuff marks, no signs of a struggle. So? Brewster grunted. So, Poirot continued patiently. Lydia did not die here. She was placed here. The colonel stiffened. Placed? That would require strength, precision. Exactement, Poirot said, and the murderer moved her with care, lifting, not dragging. A soldier's steadiness, or someone accustomed to physical discipline. Brewster said nothing. Poirot's eyes traced the curve of the railing. And notice the rose. The flower was fresh when discovered. Its stem did not bruise against her gown. He looked back at the colonel. A man who handles objects with ceremonial exactness. A shadow flickered across Brewster's eyes, but Poirot pretended not to see it. He continued climbing until he reached the landing where Lydia's head had rested. Here, the faintest indentation marred the plush carpeting. Poirot knelt. Look closely, he said. The colonel leaned in. A mark, circular. From a boot heel, Poirot said softly. One that did not match Lydia's shoes, nor any of the lady's footwear. You suspect a man, then? Poirot tapped the mark. More than that, I suspect a man who stopped here, paused, and adjusted his hold on the body. Brewster's jaw tightened. Poirot stood, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. But there is more. A single thread caught on the banister. He plucked it free delicately. Dark wool? From a uniform coat, perhaps? Brewster swallowed visibly. Poirot? What exactly are you implying? Poirot's smile was calm, almost kind. Implying? Nothing at all, mon ami. I am merely observing. The staircase tells its story. We simply listen. The colonel's expression hardened. Then listen to this. I saw Victor Langford sneaking upstairs that night. He had every reason to silence Lydia before she ended his engagement. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. A useful detail. And yet... He glanced again at the landing, then at the colonel. There is something in this house more dangerous than passion, more desperate than greed. What? Brewster asked. Fear, Poirot said quietly. Someone acted out of fear. He turned and began descending the stairs. We are close now, mon colonel. Very close. The shadows are thinning. Brewster remained frozen on the landing, his hands clenched at his sides. And Poirot, his little gray cells alight, knew the truth was beginning to press against the walls, ready to spill into the open. Chapter 8. The Whisper Behind the Curtain. The music room of the Pink Palace had fallen silent since Lydia's death. Once filled with her crisp piano scales and lilting melodies, it now felt like a mausoleum of echoes. Poirot entered quietly, Colonel Brewster following with stiff reluctance. A faint draft brushed past them. The window? The colonel asked. Poirot pointed instead to the thick velvet curtains swaying ever so slightly. Non, mon ami. A draft so delicate comes from a hidden source. He approached the curtains, his fingertips grazing the heavy fabric. When Lydia practiced here, she often stood to stretch. She would draw these curtains apart. Perhaps she found something she should not have. He pulled the curtains back, revealing a slim decorative panel in the wall. A nearly invisible seam ran along its edge. A secret compartment, Poirot murmured. Brewster scowled. This house is full of ridiculous theatrics. Poirot ignored the remark and pressed lightly on the panel. With a soft click, it swung open. Inside lay a stack of letters, their edges worn from rereading. A faint perfume clung to them, Lydia's signature scent. Colonel Brewster stepped forward. What on earth? Poirot removed the top letter and unfolded it. His eyes scanned the words and his expression grew grave. It is a love letter, he said quietly. But not from Victor Langford. Then who? Poirot handed him the letter. Read. Brewster's eyes moved across the ink and he paled. This handwriting, this tone, it's someone older, someone with authority, someone she feared and admired. Poirot nodded. Oui. And that is not all. He reached back into the compartment and retrieved a small gold locket. Inside, a photograph of Lydia smiling, radiant, hopeful, and beside it half of a torn ticket stub. A train ticket. Poirot noted. One way, London. The colonel frowned. She planned to run away? Perhaps not run, Poirot corrected. Perhaps escape. There is a difference. The room seemed to grow colder. Poirot replaced the letters carefully. Whoever wrote these met Lydia in secret. She guarded their identity fiercely, but also desperately. She feared exposure, and someone feared what she might reveal. Brewster swallowed. So the murderer could be someone with a reputation to lose, Poirot finished. Someone who could not allow Lydia to speak. Someone who would place her body gently, almost respectfully, upon the staircase. The colonel stiffened. Poirot, you cannot mean... Poirot suddenly raised a hand. A sound. A whisper. Not from the room, but behind the wall. He stepped closer, listening. A faint scuffling as though someone had been eavesdropping and was now attempting to slip away through a hidden corridor. Poirot's eyes flashed. Quickly, mon colonel. The walls of this palace are not as empty as they appear. They rushed toward the source of the sound, but a distant door clicked shut. Soft, controlled, deliberate. Poirot halted. "The murderer," he murmured, "has just revealed their greatest mistake." His gaze drifted back to the hidden compartment. They returned to ensure nothing had been missed. Chapter 9. The Colonel's Confession. The drawing room of the Pink Palace was dim, lit only by the wavering glow of a single table lamp. Poirot had requested the atmosphere deliberately, for shadows loosen tongues that daylight keeps disciplined. Colonel Brewster stood near the fireplace, shoulders rigid, jaw tight, as though bracing for battle. Poirot entered with calm precision. "Mon Colonel," he said softly, "we must speak." Brewster exhaled sharply. "If this is about the letters—" "It is about everything," Poirot interrupted gently. "The letters, the hidden corridor, the body arranged with military care, and the fear that has driven this crime." The Colonel turned away, staring into the flames. "You think me a fool. I served my country for 30 years. I command men. I do not cower in fear." Poirot approached, hands neatly folded. "And yet Lydia Montrose frightened you." Brewster's shoulders jerked. "She was a child, barely 22. "A child who held your reputation in her hands," Poirot said. "A child who could destroy you with a single letter." The Colonel spun around. "I did not touch her. She came to me for advice, nothing more. She admired me, yes, but I never encouraged." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Never? The tone of your letters says otherwise." The Colonel froze, eyes widening. Poirot's voice softened. "You cared for her, perhaps more than was wise. But you did not kill her out of passion or jealousy. You acted out of fear, fear she would speak, fear the scandal would ruin you." "That's a lie," Brewster whispered hoarsely. "I wanted to protect her. She confided in me. She told me things about Victor, about this house, things that made her afraid." He swallowed. "She was planning to run to London. I tried to persuade her to wait, to let me help." Poirot stepped closer. "So you met her the night she died?" "Yes," the Colonel admitted, voice trembling. "We argued. She was resolute, but when she left me, she was alive." Poirot studied him quietly. "You arranged her body with a soldier's care, that is undeniable." The Colonel flinched. "When I found her, on the landing, she was already dead. I panicked. If anyone knew I had met her earlier, they would assume the worst." "So you tidied the scene," Poirot said gently. "Made it look like a tragic fall." Brewster nodded miserably. Poirot sighed. "Mon Colonel, you have lied, but not committed murder. That, I believe, belongs to another." The Colonel's head jerked up. "But the evidence, the thread on the banister, my boot mark." "The murderer anticipated suspicion," Poirot said calmly, "and placed clues that pointed to you, a calculated misdirection." Brewster stared, stunned. "Someone framed me?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Oui. Someone who feared Lydia's escape, someone with access to the secret corridors, someone who listened behind the walls." He turned toward the doorway. "And now, Colonel Brewster, it is time we catch them." The room fell silent as Poirot's final words lingered like smoke. "For the killer is growing desperate, and desperation, mon ami, is the enemy of precision." Chapter 10. The Unmasking at Midnight. The Pink Palace clock chimed midnight, its deep tolling echoing through the marbled halls like a countdown to revelation. Poirot stood in the grand foyer, the suspects gathered in a tense semicircle. Victor Langford, pale and trembling, Miss Beatrice clutching her shawl, Mrs. Pembroke stern and silent, and Colonel Brewster grim with wounded dignity. Poirot cleared his throat softly. "Mes amis, the time has come. The murderer of Lydia Montrose walks among us even now, desperate, cunning, and believing themselves beyond suspicion. No one breathed. Poirot began to pace, hands behind his back. Lydia discovered a truth hidden within these walls, a secret correspondence, a clandestine lover. But the key to her death is this. She found something more dangerous than forbidden affection. He pointed upward toward the ornate ceiling. The house has passages, old servant corridors. Someone used them to spy, to listen, to follow Lydia unnoticed. Miss Beatrice gasped. You mean someone has been living inside the walls? Not living, Poirot corrected. Merely lurking. His eyes fixed on Mrs. Pembroke. You, madame, know every corner of this house. You keep its keys, its history, its gossip. Mrs. Pembroke stiffened. How dare you? Poirot nodded calmly. You kept Lydia close, guided her, even controlled her. And when she found the hidden compartment, your hidden compartment, you panicked. Victor stared at her. Mrs. Pembroke, you? Poirot continued, voice smooth as silk. Lydia discovered your letters. Not love letters, but threats disguised as mentorship. You warned her to remain quiet about a financial discrepancy. Money missing from the estate accounts. Money you had siphoned cleverly for years. Mrs. Pembroke's composure cracked. She misunderstood. No, madam. You feared exposure. Poirot stepped closer. You followed her that night through the walls. When she entered the staircase landing, you struck her from behind. Quick, efficient. Miss Beatrice clutched her mouth. Poirot's eyes sharpened. You placed her on the steps and left the rose, a symbol she adored, believing it would soften the brutality. But you forgot one thing. He held up the torn train ticket. She was leaving not out of romance, but to report you. And even in death she left clues. The corridor dust on her shoes. The indentation from your sensible heel. The wool thread from your cardigan. A trembling rage spread across Mrs. Pembroke's face. You meddling, insufferable little man! She lunged toward Poirot, but Colonel Brewster stepped forward, restraining her. Poirot bowed his head gently. Merci, mon colonel. Mrs. Pembroke, breath shaking, collapsed into silence. Victor whispered, She killed Lydia. Because of money? Poirot shook his head. Because of pride. Pride is a poison far more deadly. As the constable led Mrs. Pembroke away, the Pink Palace exhaled at last, its long-held secrets released into the night. Poirot turned to the staircase, now quiet, almost peaceful. Justice, mademoiselle, he murmured. At last your voice is heard. And with that, he retrieved his hat, straightened his lapels, and walked out, into the cool midnight air. Another mystery solved by the meticulous grace of Hercule Poirot.